Thanks so much, and it's an honor for me to present to the group and follow great presenters like Adam and Tom. We're going to be covering an aspect that's just as technical, but one that's entirely moderated for us. So we know with digestion that I'm going to teach you a couple key ways that we can optimize what's going on, but this is all taken care of for us. My practice, this is me making the donuts. And I'm going to start with a quote that we've all heard, "You are what you eat." Raise your hand if you've heard that. Yeah, absolutely. I am going to modify this a little bit and say that you are what you digest, okay? And what we're going to talk about are just a couple key reflex points that we can hit on to assist in this process. Now, we're going to do just a brief study of anatomy. This is going to take about a minute, and you're going to understand what's actually going on in the digestion process. And then when I tell you how to optimize this process, it's going to make a lot more sense. So what we've got up here is a great design of the different elements of the digestive system. And are you thinking right now, is he seriously going to teach us about digestion in 1 minute? Yes, I am. Here we go. Go! So it all begins in the mouth. When we talk about digestion, there are two factors that need to be present. We've got enzymes, okay? The enzymes are catalysts. This is all the deeper into chemistry we're going to go, but enzymes are catalysts. And what a catalyst is a compound that speeds up a chemical process that would happen otherwise. So what we had for breakfast this morning, if we were just to leave it out on the breakfast table or in the car, wherever we ate breakfast, I won't judge, that entity would have broken down on its own. It might have taken a month or two, but it would be pretty foul in the process. When we consume that same entity, it breaks down inside our body so quickly because enzymes or catalysts speed that process up. So I mention that because digestion really does begin in the mouth. Not just the mechanical aspect of busting up the food, that is mechanical, but the chemical component begins there also. That's the only thing that's not shown here. Everything else is included. So our digestive system actually also includes something that should be up here, which would be the mouth, right? Process begins there. We're chewing up the food and we're actually mixing these enzymes in. Now there's two enzymes that show up there. We won't go into great detail, but breaks down starches or carbohydrates, and it breaks down fats, two different types of enzymes. This is the reason why, if you consume one of my favorite foods, yes, it's kind of a health food, chocolate, it starts to break down in your mouth because chocolate is largely fat and sugar. And so those breakdown processes begin. Think about it. By the time you swallow chocolate, it's largely broken down. Well, let's take a step further. Once you swallow, then it emanates down. This is the very end of the esophagus, okay? If people have acid reflux type symptoms, this is where it's actually occurring. This little piece showing up above this large mass, which is the liver. So this right there is the end of the esophagus. It drops into the stomach, through the stomach, then into the small intestine, which is this long, almost 30 feet long group of tubing, then large intestine, and then we're done. So the other elements that are shown here are the liver, helps produce some enzymes, the pancreas, which produces the vast majority of our enzymes, and the gallbladder, which is right here. So there's your anatomy lesson. Now you understand everything that you need to know to understand the rest of this lecture. So let's move forward from here. Stomach. I take it back. The anatomy lesson continues here just a little bit. Can we see these different layers? It's kind of a breakaway theme where you can see the layers in different directions that are being represented there. These are the muscular layers inside the stomach. The reason why you needed to see that is because that stomach's job is to churn, and it contracts in multiple different directions because there are muscles that are oriented in those different directions. So when we eat our food, there's about a 2-hour process of digestion, which is just the food hanging out there in the stomach. It's literally got to be there for close to 2 hours before it's ready to be fed through the rest of that system that I demonstrated earlier. Now let me give you our first big tidbit. This is huge in proper digestion. In order for the stomach's action to happen properly, we have to have had hydration ahead of the meal. Now I said hydration ahead of the meal. By a show of hands, who has heard not to drink a lot with your meal? Has anybody heard that? Great. That's fantastic. So the wisdom behind that is that some of these digestive enzymes that I talked about will be diluted if we drink a lot with our meal. That is absolutely true. So here's the key point. About 30 minutes before mealtime, load up on water. That's 12 to 16 ounces. So 1.5 to 2 cups of water. The body then takes that water, cleaves it, breaks it up, and takes that H2O, but it takes the H, which is the hydrogen from there, binds it with chloride, and creates hydrochloric acid. So who thinks of acid as a bad thing when it comes to digestion? And I have yes, right. So acid reflux is a bad thing because that's not where we want the acid, up in the esophagus. We want it to stay contained in the stomach for up to 2 hours. Our stomach can handle a very, very acidic environment for up to 2 hours. The esophagus cannot. So part of the trick here is to get the acid load strong enough in the stomach so it can do its job and move everything on, because the stomach handles a pH of 2 hydrochloric acid. Now that is acidic enough to eat through the paint on the hood of my car in the time that I'm doing my lecture up here. But my stomach can handle that for 2 hours. It doesn't do so well with a pH that's lighter duty, maybe 3, for 4 hours or so. And therein lies the issue with reflux, that you don't see this described on the back of the box of Nexium, but the fact of the matter is, when we're dealing with acid reflux, it's actually a timing issue. Sometimes it's acid being produced too late. Okay, so without going too far into depth there, what are you going to do about a half hour before mealtime on the holidays? Drink water. Perfect. And your body's going to take that water, introduce chloride, pull the hydrogen off, and create hydrochloric acid. This is huge because for protein breakdown to happen properly, the acid has to be there. I talked about the digestive process starting in the mouth. That's actually having to do with breaking down starches. So think your breads, think rices, potatoes, sugars. Once that process begins, it goes on hold. For the 2 hours that the stomach's doing its work, those enzymes they become senescent. They quiet down, and then they activate when we leave the stomach. So leaving the stomach, then it moves in after about 2 hours there, moves into the small intestine, spends about 4 to 6 hours there, then from there to the large intestine, and so on. Let's talk through the mechanics here. Look at sweet thing there. So this little cutie pie is in the process of chewing up this English muffin, and the majority of the digestion is beginning there. Those starches have to be cleared in a two-step process, before and after the stomach. And the sugars are the same way. Now, I get a lot of questions about sugar consumption, and in general, I like to limit it, but I have admitted to this group before that I'm a recovering sugarholic, and you never are fully out of the woods on that. So let me teach you a couple of the tricks that you can utilize this time of year, because the holidays are a time where we're definitely going to be encountering, and I'm not going to tell you not to eat what she's making. Looks like she means business. Yeah. So, donuts and jam, for instance. We're going to break this down where? First in the mouth, and then by the pancreas. So the stomach's got to do its job, but before that, chewing properly is going to aid drastically in this. So if we're hydrated well, about a half hour before we eat, we drink that 1.5 to 2 cups of water, and then we chew very thoroughly. We're going to have the majority of this, because this is a very starchy meal right here, our component of the meal. If we eat this early on and chew it very thoroughly, we're guaranteed to digest it properly. Then the second component, in this case it's duck, but it could be a standing rib roast, it could be turkey, it could be this duck. This is largely protein and fat. The majority of the breakdown of this is going to happen during those 2 hours in the stomach, okay? One of the tricks that you can engage is eating those heavier components of the meal, the meat, the protein, eating that first. And this is where the second trick comes in. The first trick was drinking that water a half hour ahead of time. The second trick is when your body consumes fat or protein, which almost inevitably go together, there is something called leptin signaling. And that signaling causes your body to register fullness. So these delicious donuts and jam that she cooked up, you can have. But if you're having that after you've consumed the protein and the fat there, consume this first, then you're going to be less likely to eat 5 or 6 of those donuts, which as a recovering sugarholic, I can tell you, is quite easy to do. So 2 tricks have been shared so far. We talked about the importance of hydration ahead of time, and I want to reinforce that good information that many of you had heard already. Don't drink a lot with your meal time. Thank you. That's fantastic. It's fine to be drinking a bit along the way, but you want strong input of water, should be water, about 30 minutes ahead of time, then not a whole lot of drinking with your meal, just whatever would be necessary to keep yourself comfortable. Then the second component is actually after chewing the food properly, making sure that you're eating your protein and fat content first. That'll signal your satiety, and then consume your starches after that. So starches are going to be your breads, your potatoes, your rices, your pastas, or any simple carbohydrates. Let's talk a little bit further here. So hydrate ahead of the mealtime. The second component to the pre-meal endeavor is to prepare to eat, the relaxation response. Now, many of you have heard me talk before, and you'll hear me talk frequently about the fight or flight response being our body responding to a stressor. Sound familiar? The second branch that the body flips into of the nervous system is the rest and digest component. Okay? So if we're not in a fight or flight response, if we're not responding to a stressful email or a stressful phone call, if we're not in the fight or flight response, then we might as well be shifting more towards the rest and digest. This is absolutely true, and at holiday time, it's not strange, especially as a chiropractic physician, for me to be treating folks with holiday stress. Those two words I hear together quite a lot this time of year. So this relaxation component. Now, it's really easy for me to tell somebody to relax, right? But it's a little bit harder to do. This is where I'm going to clue you into something else that can be very helpful this time of year, and that is deep breathing. 5 deep intentional breaths will shift your nervous system from one of a fight or flight or stress response into a relaxation. So sitting down, even if you've been preparing the meal, you're stressed about the timing on that, stressed because your niece that you taught she could check the doneness of pasta by throwing it against the wall, just took a bowl of ravioli and did it. That didn't happen to me. That's stressful. She did what I told her. So whatever your reasoning is to have to relax, 5 deep breaths can put you in that state. That plus the 2 additional things I shared with you so far will optimize digestion tremendously. And let's talk about what's next. Don't drink too much during dinner. Make sure you're chewing the food very thoroughly. This sounds like common sense stuff, but if we really slow down and take the time to implement it, it makes a huge difference in mixing and intermingling those enzymes, which we know are the big component to breaking this food down. And eat slowly. Sequencing the meal has to do with actually eating those proteins and fats first, then layer the starches on top of that, and your consumption of those starchy foods will be much less. Yeah. And the starches just tend to precede the issue that I deal with the most after the first of the year with patients, which is weight loss and how to take off some of those extra pounds that have been put on. So that's why I mention that now. It's not that we can't eat them, but when we follow this sequence, the body naturally signals and doesn't have the desire to consume as much. We don't have that same leptin signaling when it comes to starches, and that's the reason why I recommend doing it this way. So, pause at least 30 minutes before dessert, so after dinner, give yourself about a half hour, and that timing component makes a huge difference in terms of the way the body's going to assimilate and how many calories you're going to take in. And then rest and digest. Again, taking the time to slow down. Light movement's great. If you want to take a little walk after dinner, that's fantastic, but give your body time to break down what's been done there. And any questions I can answer? John?
Quick question.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, is it bad or good, drinking cocktails before you eat your dinner?
Sure. So it's absolutely fine to be consuming the cocktail before dinner. I would do the water on top of that. You just don't want to count. You don't want to count that cocktail to 6 ounces of cocktail as the fluid. Water's got to be. Yes, you can measure the ice that's in there. We'll let that pass. But yeah, cocktail's fine. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
You're saying drink water before the cocktail, if you're going to have a cocktail.
Perfectly fine to consume the cocktail, even at the time between. I mentioned drinking the water about 30 minutes before the meal. You're fine to sip on a cocktail after you've loaded with that water. Okay,
and
yeah.
Then will the water before the meal, would that help with acid reflux?
Tremendously. And the reason why is the introduction of that water at that point in time gives your body the medium, okay, the fluid medium in which it's going to create that hydrochloric acid. When the hydrochloric acid level becomes strong enough, your stomach won't need to hold the contents of the meal for over that ideal 2-hour period. And the sooner that those move on, the less likely that acid is to kick back up in your esophagus. Great question. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And you mentioned, the protein before the starch. What about solids and stuff like that? Do you eat that at the same time you do protein, or can you do the same thing?
Wonderful question. Yeah. So salad, for instance, is often thought of separate and separate from, say, a protein or starch. It's kind of its own entity. If we were to extract the protein from lettuce, for instance, you'd have a pile of water and fiber left there. So that's a great question. That lettuce and leafy greens, vegetables in general, will be a combination of starch, fiber, and some protein. You can consume the salad quite freely along with the...
Do you do it before or at the same time as the protein?
Great question, and that really goes for veggies in general. We have certain vegetables, root vegetables like beets, carrots, parsnips, things like that are higher in sugar, but they still have such an incredible load of fiber and some protein there, so they don't need to be handled as a separate entity. Wonderful. Any further questions? Yes, Alan.
In your professional opinion, because you want to hydrate before the meal, because you want to add acid, and because you want to relax, don't you think red wine would be a better choice?
I love it. There's no agenda here, is there? I do. I'd have to say, in my professional opinion, that yeah, red wine would be preferable.
Prescription for that?
Yes, you bet. That's a script I can actually write. Sure. Thanks. Yes. How many meals per day? That's a wonderful question. If somebody demonstrates a good ability to regulate blood sugar, meaning they don't have tendencies towards hypoglycemia, which are low blood sugar attacks, or history of diabetes that they're managing, 2 to 3 meals a day is actually optimal. Yeah, that's optimal. What happens is whenever there is difficulty in breaking down foods and regulating blood sugar properly, the advice is given to eat many small meals throughout the day, at which time sometimes folks are eating 5, 6, even 7 meals, snacking or grazing throughout the day. And I could speak for hours on this alone, but the change in behavior of introducing multiple meals like that actually is a Band-Aid to a blood sugar regulation issue. It's one that should absolutely be followed if someone's not regulating blood sugar, but in general, that's it. The three a day is great, or 2, and I could expound on that if anybody has further questions. That's a great question. Are we all done? Thank you for your attention and the wonderful questions. Happy holidays.